So in order to have a starting point for centering our boring bar, I use mandrels, and these were left over. These came with the boring, main boring, so the align boring setup, and Ed Lake had made these. So, and they go in either end of the saddle. One there. This one does not have a hole for a dowel because there is no dowel in the end housing. So we put those in place, and now we can slide our bar in, and then we can move these uprights a little bit one way or the other until the bar spins nicely, and then we know we're fairly centered. Then after that point, I will use dial indicators to zero it in to within a couple of tenths or so. So I'm now going to get the bar in position. Too far. I'm just going to put the caps on. I'm not going to torque them down or anything. I just want them to hold the bushings in position. I think in this case I'm going to since I don't want them to lift up. I'll just put a very light snug onto those. So now I'm just going to give a rotation on the bar, see how it feels. And it's very stiff, so something is a little off, so we need to just sort of tweak it a bit until it feels nice. Another thing it can be is your up and down, so I'm going to loosen up those supports because it'll rest into those mandrels. So break these loose. And that seems to have freed things up a little. Seem to make the biggest difference, so you can feel it's rotating with very minimal drag. Then we can go back and retighten these. And each time you tighten one, rotate the bar, make sure it feels nice. So, and you can correlate how your crankshaft is going to feel by how the boring bar feels in the uprights at this stage. So it's almost a guarantee that if it's stiff, hard to turn, that it's not straight enough, and your crankshaft is going to be stiff and hard to turn. These need to be very, very tight. I had put a scribe line, it's on the other side along here, which gives me just a bit of reference. And it's interesting because I have that scribe line, and P1 and 2530 and 2025 happen to use the same line, which is interesting. So I would also assume Phantom 2 and maybe even Wraith will be in that same position. But then I have another line way up here, and that's for Phantom 3. And since Phantom 3, the crankshaft is much deeper, so now we can tighten these down to clamp the uprights in position. And I normally like to start with the center. And each time you tighten a couple down, you want to rotate the bar, make sure that it still feels nice and free, because as you clamp it down, you may need to readjust this area again. So I have my dial indicator in place here so that I can zero in the boring bar even closer than what the mandrels will allow. The mandrels normally get you within, I would say, 5 thousandths or so. I like to be definitely under 1 thousandths centered. I try to work to 1/10. I don't normally push myself to zero out on a 10th reading gauge. So if I have a 10th or a 10th and a half, then I say that's good enough. So it certainly is admirable to go to zero, but again, a 10th isn't going to make a huge difference. So now when you need to center it out, when you need to shift the bar a little bit, what you do is you loosen up the 4 clamping bolts here, and then normally I can use something like this hammer or whatever to just lightly apply pressure to shift the bar over. And so if you're 3/10 off, then you need to shift the bar 1.5 tenths. So you need to keep that in mind. So I'll show you the indicator in action here. So we're just about at zero. So we have the indicator at 0, and then we just very gently sweep it along. On the underside, we're reading at maybe 3/4 or so of a tenth. So then we continue to sweep along. We get to the other side, and we're at 0. So as far as center from right to left, we're dead on 0. As far as up and down, we're maybe 1/2 tenth or 3/4 of a tenth off. But again, that's certainly more than acceptable. So we'll just do the sweep again. And you'll notice when you change directions on an indicator like this, that sometimes you need to recenter it after you start moving it in that direction. And that's just from the drag. So again, we're at like 3/4. So we're sweeping up a little more. And again, we're just about at 0. So, and again, that reads to the 10th. So 1/1000 is tiny, and 1/10 is even a lot smaller. So now the same thing has to be done on the other side of the boring bar. This happens to be the back side of the engine. So we will set things up and handle it at the front now. So I have my indicator set up on the front now, and I'm taking readings on it. Now this one, I have it's set to the 1/2,000ths. So I'll just show you what it's like when you have a gauge that reads in to a different scale amount. So, and you'll see, I think that's about half of a thousandth or so. Okay. So yeah, so it's showing a half a thousandth. Like I say, sometimes you change directions and that changes it a little bit. So I'll zero it again. And I'll take another sweep. Okay, so now it's showing it's dated 0. So one more sweep, just for fun. So you can see I changed directions, so you get that effect. Okay, so now I think I'm in good enough shape to go to the one that reads to the 10th. So I switched out gauges, and this is one that's reads to the 10th. And I did a little bit of tweaking, and I have it to about a half a tenth right and left. And I think that that is satisfactory. And I'll show you at the sweep. Maybe even close to three quarters of a tenth. So I might give it a little bit more tweaking, but I could be happy with that. So I gave the adjustment just a little bit more tweaking, and we're within just a couple of tenths. So I don't have it at 0 on this side, but it zeroes out on the other. So we'll take a sweep here and I'll show you. And there it is. So there is a tiny bit on the up and down, tiny bit more, but it certainly is within a good tolerance.